I don't love what I'm about to talk about here, but I have seen sky replacements go wrong so many times that I wanted to take a few minutes and just talk about some strategies to do sky replacement in Photoshop that looks as realistic as possible. And again, this is a controversial issue because some photographers are just adamant against sky replacement. If the sky isn't right, come back when it is, or capture it as it is now and make the best of it. And I tend to fall mostly into that camp. But I have a picture here where the sky is completely blown out and it would definitely benefit from a nicer sky. So I'm just going to take you through a process here on this particular image while not condoning the practice of sky replacement, yet acknowledging that a lot of times people do it anyway, so it might as well be done right. Let's dive in and take a look at this. So here's an image that we're going to be working with. This is in Alameda County, California, and it was a very beautiful morning, but you can see in this particular image, the sky is completely blown out. And a sky replacement would kind of make sense here just because the sky is so blown out. We could try to recover some highlights and work with what we have. But for this particular case, let's just take a look at the sky replacement process on this. And you can kind of see here are a couple of options that I've come up with. But I want to just start from scratch and just talk you through a couple of strategies and techniques and just things to keep in mind as you're going through a sky replacement process. So if you are starting out in Lightroom with your photographs, as I do, you just want to pull it into Photoshop and open it there. So simple enough process where we're just going to right click on the image and click edit in Photoshop. Okay, we have our image now open in Photoshop. First thing I do is I just come over here and just unlock the layer just so we have full freedom to do whatever we would like. And this process is pretty darn simple. One thing that I want to say before we start here is I kind of want to beg you, if you are going to replace the sky in Photoshop, please don't use one of the preset skies in Photoshop. If there's anything that's going to call you out as an amateur or somebody who's trying to fake a photograph, it's using the fake skies that come with Photoshop, because it's the same 5 or 6 skies that everybody else in the world has access to. And the best way to do that is to export your own skies. So if you see a sky that you just are absolutely in love with, a sunset, clouds, blue sky, whatever it is, take some photos of that sky and build your own library of skies and use those, because at least it's going to be a little bit more authentic. I don't love talking about it, but it is something that is done, and I just want to make sure if you are going to do it, it's going to be done right. So export your own skies. If you're going to do it, do not use the Photoshop presets, which you're going to see in just a second. So once we have our photo open in Photoshop, it's so incredibly simple. One of the tricks you might do is to zoom in a little bit first. That's just going to help you see exactly what you're working with here, especially when we have something in the foreground here, or something that you know overlaps on the sky. We're going to want to be able to take a close look at that. So we'll just zoom in a little bit just so we can have a closer look at that. And then once we do that, go up into Edit, Sky Replacement. And that's going to pull up the sky replacement menu. You're going to see it's going to default to the one that you used last time. If it does an error like that, just do it again. Sometimes it just takes a couple of tries for Photoshop to get it right. So it'll default to the last sky that you used, which is the last one I used for this example as I was preparing for this video. And there'll be a couple of options here, but you can see in this case, it didn't do a great job of replacing the sky behind this tree, because we're choosing a sky that's much darker than the sky was. And that would work just fine if this tree wasn't here, but Photoshop had a little bit of a hard time distinguishing the sky behind the tree. So we could go in there and really refine it. We have our shift edge and our fade edge here. Watch what happens when I bring the shift edge down into the negative. You can see how it just adds more of a linear gradient almost to the sky, and just gives it a little bit more of a natural look, so that the highlights behind the tree just kind of extend further out. So that's a good way to do it. You can just play with that shift edge until it looks somewhat more natural to you. You can see when you move it all the way the other way, it's tempting to do that, but you also will notice that it starts to overlap the sky into our foreground here. Like it's cutting out some of the tree, it's overlapping into the grass here. And when you really start looking for sky replacements, you will see this effect. And I see it often in photos that have had an obvious sky replacement, and just with people who are just a little bit careless in getting it done, it's pretty darn obvious. So just play with that shift edge until it looks right to you, or pick a different sky altogether. Fade edge is a different effect. You're going to see that as we go lower, it's just going to bring the color of the sky, just that linear gradient is just going to be a little bit less visible. And then if we move it up, you see what it does there. It just makes that horizon line a little bit brighter. So you can play with it and see. You also have access to control the brightness of the sky that you choose. So you can just kind of, again, play with that and just see what fits. The things I would watch out for are the sky overlapping onto your foreground and just getting some of that color, some of those color splotches just appear in your foreground, and they'll start to cut off your foreground elements too, which does not look good. You can play with temperature also in this setup. So here, I think what I would do is not pick that sky. So these are the skies that have come with Photoshop directly. You have a choice of blue skies, you have a choice of quote spectacular skies. I see this one all the time. This is a very popular sky, and I'm going to put it in here so you can see. But you see it all the time. And there's some things to consider here. When you pick out a sky, you need to consider where the sun is coming from and where the light is. So you can tell that in this photograph of this sky, I'm just going to pull this up here so you can see that this is the original sky photograph that Photoshop has used. And look, the sun is setting in the distance this way, right? So we're looking into the sunset. And so if we pull that back down, and let's just say that we were going to select this just for fun, and then let's zoom out on this. Now, how would it make sense that the sky is setting down in front of us, yet we clearly have some illumination coming from behind us? It doesn't make sense. There would be two sources of light in this photograph, and that just doesn't make sense. And some people will just never notice that. I don't know if it's a illness that I have or what, but I do. I notice that stuff where it just doesn't make sense. I'm like, well, how does the light in this photograph make sense? There's obviously two sources or three sources of light. So when you do a sky replacement, I think the number one thing to keep in mind is the direction of light and what light makes sense, and which light in the sky you choose goes with the composition that you have and where the light is in your photograph. So I'm just going to completely undo that because that looks like garbage in my opinion. So I'm going to go back up and go into sky replacement. And once you're in here, and so it's here, it's going to just default again to the sky that I chose last. And it's tempting because at first glance you're like, ooh, that looks really cool, and it's tempting, and people fall into the trap, but just be careful. So if these are the skies that just come with Photoshop. To add your own, you're going to have this little plus button down here, and then you can just come in and just add the skies that you want. And I think if I remember this correctly, the TIFF files that I exported here are some skies that I might want to work with. So if we were just to select those files and open them up, then they'll be imported here into our menu, and then they'll just stay there. So yeah, these are some skies that I was working with. So I don't know, we might look at some of these and just see if they would be a good fit. That's kind of a cool sky, right? And the light might make sense here. And then we have, these are some stormy skies that I was already working with. I think for the example that I worked on earlier, I went with this one because it made the most sense, because we can't see what's going on behind us. So maybe it's less cloudy back there and there's a ray of light coming through and illuminating this trail and this hill. So keep that in mind. And then say we wanted to do this one, we'd click back into the menu here, and then let's just play with our shift edge and our face edge a little bit, just so we can even things out and just make things a little bit more natural. We could decrease the brightness or increase the brightness here. Might be a little too much. I don't know. I'm just playing around just to show you what's possible here. But keep in mind that you don't want your sky to overlap into your foreground. You don't want your sky to cut off your foreground. Also be careful, because if you move around your sky, which you can do like this, you can just grab it and just move it around. This is something I see pretty often too, where somebody will place their sky but then forget that it doesn't cover the edge, and so you might see just that straight edge where the sky is missing. Obviously, it's just a pretty amateur mistake, and the solution is to either just move that back where the sky fits, or crop it so that piece isn't there anymore. But it's another thing to keep in mind, because that will happen, and I have seen it a lot. So make sure as you're doing this that the light direction is coming from the right way. Make sure there are not two sources of light. Make sure that your shift edge and fade edge are done appropriately, so that you're not cutting anything off and you don't have sky overlapping into your foreground. And I think that's really it. I think that's what I wanted to say here. So once we have it selected and we have it placed the way we want, you're going to have all of this information, all of these different layers in Photoshop, and you can still go in and make adjustments here if you want. But what I would do once I'm done is just select all of those layers, right click on them, and then either merge layers or flatten image. And I'll just flatten the image so that all of those layers just are in one layer now. And then I'm just going to close it in Photoshop, hit save, and it'll reopen it in Lightroom for me. So then you can see the version that we ended up with. And then if you want, you can still go in and make more edits. You can click auto if you'd like and see what that does. You can turn that off. You can go in and add any masking that you would want to do. You can just select the sky and make any changes that you want to make to it. You can bring down highlights or bring up the contrast or whatever. Here it might look good to bring the highlights down just a little bit. Again, being careful, because that inside of the tree is going to give us a problem. So if we were to bring all that all the way down, it might not look quite right, because the highlights behind the tree won't be affected as much. So we could do that. We could pull up the contrast some, just kind of bring out some of that moodiness in the sky. And then another thing that I might do here, just to give that illusion of the sun behind us, is to create a radial gradient here like this, and increase the exposure a little bit, and then increase the warmth a little bit. And that's going to kind of give us that look of a break in the clouds behind us, illuminating the trail ahead. So just some thoughts on replacing skies. And if you do it, please be careful and do it professionally, and make sure that it just looks as natural as possible. Better yet, choose a day where the sky is going to look as good as you want it to look, and if it doesn't, make another trip out there and try again. For me, that's part of the beauty of photography, is the chance and the planning and hoping that the sky is right. And if it's perfect, then it's such a great feeling. And if it's not perfect, then you can still play with your composition and still try to get the best photograph that you possibly can, but without the deception. And I know there's a lot of art in photography as well, and there's nothing wrong with creating art with your photography, especially with all the digital tools available now. And I would much rather see a well done sky replacement than an AI generated image. I have my own thoughts on AI. Check it out. That's it. Thank you for watching this. I hope that this has been somewhat beneficial, that you've learned something. Thank you for spending a few minutes hanging out with me. Please subscribe to the channel if you have not, and I'll see you next time.